Good afternoon, good morning, everyone, wherever you are in the world. Uh, we are starting our, let's say, second half since we are in the World Cup here right now. We are on our second half of our Mobility Brazil Conference 2022. Our next speaker is Tom Carpenter. Carpenter. He is the CTO at CWNP, Certified Wireless Network Professionals. He will be providing us with updates on any certification, any new certifications, or anything that is coming up, and that any certifications that are going to get any updates, and they will be coming up in the next few months. So, with that, Tom.
Thank you, Gustavo. And it's good to be with you. Gustavo and I have worked together on projects in the past, and it's always been a pleasure to work with him. And I'm very glad to be here with all of you as well. As he said, I'm the CTO at CWNP. And what that means is a little different in our organization than in most. So, in most organizations, the CTO manages all of the technology within the organization, or at least the people who manage the technology. Instead, at CWNP, it means I manage the technical side of all of our certifications. So there are people who deal with customer care. There are people who deal with uh, creating products for distribution and so forth, as far as the format of those products and the delivery mechanisms and so on. And that's the non-technical side. The technical side then is, what do our certifications need to cover? What should our content look like? What should our materials look like, and so forth? And that's really what I manage. So while the title is CTO, it's really more of a technical product manager in the role that I play within this organization. And I've been here since 2012. So yes, back in June, this was my 10th year with the organization. And it's been a fun ride. We've gone through many updates of the various certifications and even launched an entirely new certification track focused on IoT in the wireless space. And I'll be talking about that some later on because we have updates in that area. So we're going to jump right in. And what I'm going to do is share with you the two new certification updates that are being released this year in 2022. And then I'll share with you just some insights into some of the content you'd see in, for example, CWSP, which is being updated this year. And we'll take a look at that. And then we'll move on to talk about the certifications that will be updated next year. And I'll also give you some extra information about other things that are coming in the pipeline. So hopefully it'll be interesting to you and provide some value if you're either on the certification journey or you're thinking about beginning the process of becoming certified with CWNP. Now, before I talk about the updates this year, I do want to mention, just in case there are those that are less familiar with us here today, and that is that CWNP is a vendor neutral certification provider. What that means is our certifications do not focus on a specific vendor's technology. We're not focusing on, for example, Cisco or Aruba Networks or uh, uh, Ruckus or Extreme Networks or any of the other names that you might have heard of out there, even though their names tend to change sometimes over time. Instead, we're focused on, how does the wireless technology work so that you can implement it well? In other words, when you go into a configuration interface with your vendor of choice, we want you to understand the impact that changes will have on your network, and not just some brief description of what a drop down box or a checkbox or a button means, but rather, how does it impact the network if I enable band steering or disable band steering? If I use 40 megahertz versus 20 megahertz channels, or 80 or 160 megahertz for that matter. And so we want you to understand the impact of your decisions as an administrator, a security professional, an analysis professional, a design professional, and so forth within the use of wireless technologies. So that's what we're all about. And what most people have found, and they've come back and told us, is that even if they've already got certifications with a vendor, they find that after gaining our certifications, all the light bulbs go off, all the understanding comes to them of how this stuff's really working. that maybe the vendor information didn't really provide. Because after all, the vendors have a lot of buttons, a lot of switches, a lot of combo boxes or commands if they have a shell interface that they have to teach you to use. And so the time is not always there, and sometimes a 3, 4, or 5 day class with them to understand everything that's going on in the background about how those technologies work. So that's what we're here for. And hopefully we've provided value to you over the years. So let's take a look at the updates this year, 2022. First of all, in the Wi-Fi track, which is CWNA, CWSP, CWAP, and CWDP, we're releasing CWSP 207. All the materials will be available for that here in actually this coming week. And it's going from version 206 to version 207. And this update is in the security space, not as big as maybe some of the other updates that we'll see with the future certification changes, because not a lot has changed since 206. The significant areas that have begun to roll out now, where we see systems that have the capability to do it, are of course in the WPA3 and OWE area. So WPA3 became available several years ago, but it wasn't implemented in hardware for a while. And then, of course, not only having hardware that implements it, but actually having that hardware that implements it. In other words, just because a vendor makes it available doesn't mean everybody has it immediately. And there's some time before it gets out into space. Well, it's showing up more and more in systems that are available. And so organizations need to be able to make good decisions about whether it's time to implement it or not and how to go about implementing it. So we give more details on WPA3 and understanding how it works under the hood. This was first introduced in CWSP 206, but we've taken it a little deeper in 207. And the same is true for OWE, opportunistic wireless encryption. The big thing that happened after the release of 206 for both WPA3 and OWE was that 802.11ax was ratified. Now, at first you might think, well, why does that matter? Why does it matter that 802.11ax is ratified? That was a PHY update, changes to the MAC, changes to the PHY. Why would that impact security in WPA3 and OWE? Well, because there's a little section in there, less than a page, where in that amendment, they specify the security requirements when you're implementing 802.11ax, which is the only one currently available, in 6 gigahertz. And the requirements in 6 gigahertz are that you use WPA3 SAE or WPA3 Enterprise if you're using WPA. So you can't use WPA2 and you can't use WPA, and you certainly can't use WEP. So you have to use WPA3 in 6 gigahertz. Why did they make that requirement? Well, because the hardware was going to come out to support 802.11ax. WPA3 was already certified and available through the Wi-Fi Alliance. So it just made sense to say, hey, in 6 gigahertz, we're going to start with WPA3. That's not all. In addition, as you know, we've been able to implement open Wi-Fi networks in 2.4 and 5 gigahertz for 20 years or so. Well, in 6 gigahertz, the 802.11ax amendment specifies that it is required to use OWE. Open system authentication alone is not allowed in 6 gigahertz. So instead, we have to use opportunistic wireless encryption. Now, I'm going to oversimplify it here, but it's basically like HTTPS for websites. There's no password required with OWE. It is simply a handshake process that generates encryption keys without any kind of user or client identity. But the point is it's encrypted, much like when we use TLS on the internet with HTTPS. You don't really have a password when you go to Google, but when you go to Google, it's encrypted. There's a handshake that takes place before you start exchanging actual data, and it's encrypted. The same is true with OWE. And so it implements that same concept for Wi-Fi. And it was kind of, when this was deployed as an RFC standard, when this was recommended, I should say, as an RFC standard, it was kind of a real, wow, why haven't we been doing this all along moment? Because the point is there's no need for a password, but we can encrypt everything going across the air. Is it completely impossible to break it? Probably not, right? But we use it on the internet, and we're confident when we go to our banking website and do banking. So it's going to give us massively better security than just open system authentication. So 802.11ax in the end had huge ramifications for security because of its requirements in 6 gigahertz. So that's one of the big reasons why 207 has a bigger focus on it than even what 206 did. There's also less WEP information. We've cut out some of the details of even how WEP worked simply because, well, you shouldn't be using it anymore, right? So, and then there's just a general refresh of all the materials. So that's CWSP moving from 206 to 207 as far as the exam identifier, and CWSP-207 will be the new exam identifier. There have been some delays with getting it into the testing centers to be able to start the testing, but I expect that'll happen here in the next couple of weeks. And by the way, those delays are the same for the CWISA. So CWISA is the other update. Now, this is in our wireless IoT track. This was a new track first launched a few years ago with the launch of what was initially called CWSA, Certified Wireless Solutions Administrator. And it was changed to CWISA a few months actually after release, about 6 months after release. And the reason for the name change was to bring really good clarity to the entire track. You will notice, for example, that the entire track at the CWNP website has this I in the middle. There's CWISA, CWICP, CWIDP, CWIIP, and CWISE, the elite level in the wireless IoT track. Well, as you've probably guessed, and as you can see from the logo here, the I stands for IoT, to make it very, very clear what this track is about. It's about wireless IoT. It's not about IoT in general. It's about wireless IoT. Now, what are we doing in CWISA 102? Well, when we first developed CWISA, the other certifications in the track did not exist. We didn't have the connectivity professional, the design professional, and the integration professional. So it was a bit cloudy about what was going to be covered in those professional level certifications. And there's a reason for that. And you'll see more detail when we get to our typical process for developing certifications at CWNP. And so there are some things in CWISA today that are better reserved for CWICP or CWIIP or CWIDP. And so those are being thinned or completely eliminated to give us space to make it more admin focused. So a whole lot of the how to configure this and how to configure that kind of things, kind of like you have in CWNA with the Wi-Fi track. Also, more hardware details. So more focused on the hardware components that make up the IoT end devices. So sensors, and not only the sensors themselves, which is a very specific subcomponent of most end devices, but the entire end device, the common CPUs that are used in them, the memory and the amount of memory that's typically available, the storage that's available. So these components that make up the IoT end device, because it's very important if you end up administering an IoT solution that you understand those devices, how they function, how to troubleshoot them, and how to configure them, and so forth. So the focus has shifted more to that level of thing. Additionally, there was an entire chapter in the original CWISA on 5G with a focus on just what is it and how's it used in wireless IoT. Instead, it's just a mention within other chapters, a couple of slides, for example, and then in the courseware, and then it's minimized significantly. And there are a couple of reasons for this. One, we felt that if we needed to cover it in the certification track, it should be covered in any level of detail in CWICP. and not in CWISA. And we'll see the CWIC PJTAs will happen next year for that update. So we'll find out what gets covered there. Again, we even here at CWNP do not always know what's going to be covered in some certification coming down the road until we do the JTAs. And again, I'll explain that a little bit later. So there's less 5G in there, and that's another area that makes more room for the other concepts that we need to cover in this 4 or 5 day class. If you attended a class, depending on how a training center chose to cover it, more hands-on using things like Raspberry Pis, if people can get their hands on them, to do IoT configuration and so forth, then it's probably going to be 5 days. Less hands-on, then you can probably fit it in 4 days. It's really tight to do it in 3. We've done it in our boot camps at our conference, but that's really just lecture at rapid pace to get through the material. It's very hard to do it in 3 days for CWISA. So that is also being released this year. And again, the exam ID will be CWISA 102 instead of CWISA 101. And that's something for all of our certifications at CWNP to know. So if you're looking at the exam ID for any certification like CWSP 207, that means it's the 7th iteration of CWSP. CWNA 109 would mean it's the 9th iteration of CWNA. And I think we have enough room for a very long time because we can go all the way up to CWSP 299, right? And given that we update about every 3 years for most of our certifications and eventually for all of them, then that means that obviously that gives us room to go for the next couple 100 years. I think we'll be okay. So what are some of the things you might see in CWSP? If you've never taken it before, just to give you a couple of insights, just a couple slides here to share with you. First of all, this is the key hierarchy. Now, this is a slide in our courseware. This is also a section in our study guide. And basically, it's helping you to visualize and understand where the keys come from that are used in encryption with CWSP individuals that implement Wi-Fi networks. So, for example, we have this thing called the master session key, the MSK, all the way at the top, right? And then under that, we have the pairwise master key, the PMK. And under that, we have the pairwise transient key, the PTK. And in that, we have encryption keys. Now, this is important to note. And it's the kind of thing you learn as you go through CWSP, because we want you to understand how these things really function. You'll generally hear people say in common YouTube videos or even books written on security related to Wi-Fi that the PTK is the encryption key that is used to encrypt your data on the Wi-Fi network. That is false. It's just not true. And this hierarchy helps you to understand it. Now, this hierarchy here is a visualization that comes from the description and details of many, many pages within the 802.11 specification. You see, the truth is the temporal encryption key is what is used to encrypt the communications on the Wi-Fi network. And it is just a portion of the PTK. And so it's very important to understand then that when we talk about our encryption keys, we are dealing with multiple keys that are in the PTK. For example, we have a key encryption key and a key confirmation key. And then we have temporal message integrity check keys for those that use message integrity check keys. Well, the point is all of this is within the PTK. So the key encryption key is what is used to encrypt the group master key, or rather the group temporal key, and send that down to the client from the access point. So the group temporal key, the GTK, contains the information used to encrypt any multicast or broadcast communication that might be sent within a BSS. So any station that is a member of that BSS will be able to decrypt it, right? Because they have that key. They acquired it when they initially connected and went through the 4-way handshake. And how did they acquire it? The access point or controller encrypted the GTK with the key encryption key and sent it to the client. And then the key confirmation key, this is an integrity check validation key that's used to confirm the integrity of the key once received. So there is more information in the PTK that is not about encrypting the actual data that you transfer than that which is about encrypting the actual data that you transfer. The temporal encryption key, sometimes just called the TK, but also called the TEK, depending on where you look in the standard, is the one that is used to encrypt your data. Okay, so this is the kind of thing that you learn when you're going through CWSP. Another thing, you hear about the four-way handshake, right? Most diagrams simplify the message content because, well, A, you don't necessarily need to know all of the message content, and B, it's easier to understand if it's not in its full detail. This text in the middle in blue here, where it says message 1, authenticator to the supplicant, and then ePaul dash key, and then 0, 0, 1, 0, P, 0, 0, A nonce, 0. Okay, all of that comes right out of the standard. The standard has exactly that line. And then it has one for message 2, for message 3, and for message 4, which is why it's called the four-way handshake, right? So we have message 1 from the authenticator to the supplicant, message 2 from the supplicant to the authenticator, message 3 from the authenticator to the supplicant, and message 4 from the supplicant to the authenticator. And the authenticator is either your access point or your controller. The supplicant is the client device. They send EAP over LAN messages back and forth, ePaul. They're called ePaul frames or ePaul keyframes because they are about negotiating information so that keys can be established. Now, I'm not going to go into all of the details of this particular slide, but we break down for you each of those comma-separated components that are part of the message. Bit 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and so forth. And by the way, even the bit here that is a P is a 0 or a 1 as well. It's just represented in the standard as a P to make it clear this is the pairwise message and key that we're in the process of developing. Pairwise means it's a unique key that exists between a pair of devices, in this case, the authenticator and the supplicant. And so it's a pairwise key that is being generated. And of course, you see the A nonce, the authenticator nonce. Well, in message 2, you would see the S nonce, the supplicant nonce. Nonce is a number used once, is the way it's generally defined, but it's effectively just a number, a random number that is generated to only use one time. And the standard specifies the algorithm to use to generate that number. And this information is transferred, but there are little parameters here that are telling you what's required, what action should be taken by the recipient, and so forth. So this is just another example of the greater level of detail we go into within the content, and we would break down all of this information for you, either in our e-learning or in our live courses. One final thing. So here's another slide, a little simpler, and this is about security, information, and event management systems, which we cover in the CWSP material. And here we're breaking down a typical SIEM into its components. So you have a source device on the network. We're collecting log information from that device. We're parsing the data, keeping only what we want, normalizing the data, putting it in a format that is consistent regardless of the source devices that it's come from. And then we ask, what do I care about now? So we have a rules engine and a correlation engine, which looks at data in real time and can trigger alerts or can take action based on what we've monitored and what we've found. And then we also have log storage, long-term storage, so we can always go in the future, we can go back and say what happened. And that's historical monitoring and analysis. And so this just gives you the overview of the components. And the reason I chose to talk about this slide today too, is because it illustrates what CWNP is all about. We're about vendor neutral, right? So we want you to understand conceptually how a security information and event management system works. And we're not so worried about one specific solution, like HP Enterprise ArcSight or IBM Q Radar or McAfee Enterprise Security or anything like that. We want you to know, okay, what do all of these kind of look like? What are they using and what features and capabilities are they generally providing to you? And so notice that we're seeing that when we get log collection, we're not just saying we use REST APIs or we use NetFlow or we use SNMP. No, there are multiple different possible methods that we can utilize. So this gives you an example then of how CWNP takes the information from multiple vendors and how they do things, and then brings it together in an aggregate model to help you understand exactly what you need to know, regardless of the vendor solution that you might choose to utilize, whether it's a paid for solution off the shelf or an open source solution off the shelf, you might say, or even just a completely custom solution, one you build from scratch. If you build it from scratch, let's say you have client devices out there and you implement your own custom developed agent that you put on the client devices that has REST API capabilities, and then you use the REST APIs to gather information from them and bring it in. And then you're going to still do some type of parsing and normalization of that, some type of real-time analysis engine. The point is, you're going to just build it all from scratch. You're still going to have these components, these various parts and pieces. So that gives you some insights into what our solutions look like as far as learning materials and things like that. And also what's new this year with CWSP and CWISA. Okay, so what about 2023? What's coming? Well, it's a big year. So we have 3 updates in 2023 for our certifications. One in the Wi-Fi track, our flagship CWNA will be moving from 108 to 109. So yeah, that means it's the 9th iteration of this certification. It has been updated that many times. So that tells you the maturity of CWNA. Now, all 3 of these, the JTA will be in the first quarter next year. The JTA is the job task analysis, and I'll talk in more details about that in just a moment. So for now, let's just leave it at that. What is CWNA going to cover? Well, again, we don't know specifically until we do the JTA, but watching the industry, watching the new technologies, what's popular and so forth. Obviously I can guess with great levels of accuracy what's likely to end up being covered. So we're likely to cover more 802.11ax, going deeper into it, getting more details, as we will then know in pretty good levels of details really what the vendors are providing to us, at least at this stage of 802.11ax hardware. More details on 6 gigahertz and its operation. We already last year in the CWDP update did cover some pretty good levels of detail on 6 gigahertz because there's a lot of confusion out there over how different things work. And we wanted to make sure that you understood how those worked, and also covered more detail on 11AX. But at the CWNA level, of course, we'll be providing that as well. And of course, WPA3 and OWE at the CWNA level will be included in there, I'm sure. And we'll see what else is covered once the JTAs are done. CWICP and CWIIP are our first 2 certification updates in the wireless IoT track at the professional level. So this year we're releasing the administrative level, CWISA. Next year, we'll have updates to CWICP and CWIIP. And yes, the year after that, we'll see the updates to CWIDP. So what are we looking at in CWICP? Well, we're looking at, again, the JTA in the first quarter. So without certainty, the likelihood is to cover more analysis and troubleshooting in here. So we'll probably see that there's a little less focus on all the nitty-gritty details of each protocol. For example, for the 802.15.4 protocol and the Bluetooth protocol, we went into very great details on all kinds of little specific message types and things like that. And we'll probably see that focus shift more to actual implementations that we're seeing and how they're implemented, and therefore what messages are used in those implementations. And then get more ability to analyze and troubleshoot because we're getting better tools is what it comes down to than we had a couple years ago when these were first created. As these are being implemented more and more, we're having more and more of a need for analysis and troubleshooting of them. And so we're going to likely see more coverage of that. For CWIIP, this is the one about integration. So connectivity is how do the protocols work in detail. Integration is about bringing the IoT solution that we deploy into integration with possibly other IoT solutions and other systems within our organization. And so what are we likely to see? Probably more automation. So more focus on REST APIs with IoT solutions, Python scripting with IoT solutions, things of that sort for automation purposes, and data processing. So how do we deal with the incoming data from our IoT end devices? And so that we're likely to see more of in the new version. But again, we'll see because the JTAs will happen in the first quarter. So that will be the updates for 2023. CWNA moving to exam ID 109, CWICP moving to 202, and CWIIP moving to 302. All right, so what is the typical process? I've alluded to this thing called a JTA a few times. So I want to give you some insight into how a typical year might look when it comes to updating products. Now, I say a typical year because 2022 has been atypical due to some problems we've had with different things and implementing some new processes and learning from that. We're releasing a little later. To give you an example, this year we wanted to do a Train the Trainer online course for our CWNTs. And when we did that, we realized a lot of valuable information comes as feedback from those trainers, which can enhance the learning materials. So we've gone back after we did, for example, our CWSP Train the Trainer, and we have been updating CWSP materials, which will be launched this week. And then we'll see a similar process with CWISA. So causing a little later release than normal. Most of the time, in most years, we release in September. We will be doing that next year, as now that we have learned this valuable information about the Train the Trainer and what it provides to us as to insights about the materials, we will be doing the Train the Trainer classes in the summer of next year for all three. Probably doing one in June, then one in July and one in August. And that will allow us to incorporate the feedback into the materials in June, or rather in July, August, and September to keep the release there so that they're all done by the end of the third quarter. So that will get back on track next year for that. Our typical launch then is that at the end of third quarter, new certifications have been launched, either early in September through to mid-September. Again, this year a little later, but next year we'll see it go back on track. So the way it works then is in quarter one, we have our JTAs and objectives. The JTA is a job task analysis, which means you get a group of subject matter experts together and you have them analyze, all right, for this job description of this individual, the network administrator, the security professional, the analysis professional, the integration professional for IoT, the connectivity professional for IoT, what have you. For a person performing this job role, what tasks do they need to be able to perform? What knowledge do they need to possess? And what tools do they need to know how to use from a general perspective? So this is what comes out of the JTA. From that, we create objectives, which are reviewed by the JTA subject matter experts, and they provide feedback, and then we finalize those objectives for the exam. Once the objectives are complete, we can begin developing exam items and learning materials, which happens in Q2 and Q3, quarter 2 and quarter 3 of the year, giving us a 9-month timeline normally to product launch. And it's not just one product. It may be one, it may be two. I don't think we'll ever see one again because we have too many certifications now. So I think 2 is probably the minimum we'll ever see in a given year. And actually, I think this will be the last year we only see 2. Going forward, I think we'll see 3 new updated certifications each year. So that's just the reality of it, because if you think about it, we have 8 different certifications in the 2 tracks. We have CWNA, CWSP, CWAP, and CWDP, and then we have CWISA, CWICP, CWIIP, CWIDP, and CWISC doesn't get updated in that way. So we have 8 certifications there, and then we have our 2 entry-level low stakes certifications where you just take the test online, and that's CWS and CWT. So in total, we have 10 different certifications on a 3-year cycle. You guessed it, 3 each year. So that's what we're going to be seeing as we move forward. So this gives you an idea of that typical process that we go through in order to go from what do we need to cover through to having the learning materials to help you learn it. And learning materials, of course, include e-learning, practice exams, study guides, and courseware material for those that teach our live, either in person or live online classes. And of course, the exam themselves as well. So all of that comes out of this process. Now, one more thing I want to talk to you about, because we've talked about the new certifications this year and next. I want to let you know about some other new things coming or coming again in 2023. So throughout the last year or year and a half, we have really dropped our webinars, and we dropped for about the last 2 years the wireless news desk. So we've had a lot of people asking us to bring back the wireless news desk. And so we've thought about what is a practical way that we can do it and really effectively manage it well and make it work with our time schedules and so forth. And so what we've decided to do is to bring it back as we're not concerned about editing it and making sure that everything is just right, but we want to get it out there kind of thing. And so it's going to end up being a live stream once per month. And the live stream will run roughly an hour when it runs, and will cover news related to the wireless industry from an enterprise perspective. So not necessarily cellular and all of that, but Wi-Fi, wireless IoT, all of those things, news related to them. And some months there may be some technical details about something as well and what have you, but be running roughly an hour for that live event. So that will happen monthly, and it will be starting in January. And then webinars are going to return monthly as well. The webinars will be a mixture of guests from vendors that want to talk about their technologies and help you understand what their technologies have to offer, to webinars that I perform that are technical deep dives into very specific areas of wireless technology. So those will be coming back as well. And then there'll be additional tutorials, deep dives, and more quarterly. So we did a multi-part series on Python a couple of years ago when CWIIP was released that same year. So that was in 2020. At the end of 2020, we did a Python tutorial, and it was, I believe we called it Just Enough to Get You Started. And honestly, it's one of the better Python tutorials that's out there just in general, really as a getting started with Python tutorial. It's around, I don't know, close to 3 hours long, something like that. And it's just there free on the YouTube channel. That's what we're talking about here, ranging from an hour and a half to 2.5 or 3 hours. These tutorials, deep dives, not covering specific certification objectives necessarily, though maybe some will be included in it, but these will be released as well. And these will be done in the format of an initial live stream. And so initially it'll be a live stream. So again, we're not going to worry about perfecting words. And if I'm the one teaching it and I slip a word here and there that's the wrong word, I'll just correct it, go on. We're not going to go back and edit it. The archive that goes to YouTube will be exactly what the live stream was. So it's going to be a live stream format with me standing at a desk, probably this desk that's right behind me right here, and presenting on camera and delivering live training in with slides, with actual live content, with captured screens, things of that sort. I've got a multi-camera setup now built for that, and I'll be able to show you hardware at certain times, and we'll be able to talk about it from that perspective. And we'll be able to look at screens to see configuration elements, and of course, slides for that as well. So again, the point is to make it feasible, to be realistic. What we're cutting out of all of these is editing. We're not going to worry about editing and clipping out faux pas and slips and slurs, and we're just going to go ahead and keep it as it is and put it up there on YouTube, because we know that you care more about the content than you do about necessarily perfect audio or even perfect video. So that's the goal there, and we're going to be bringing that out in 2013. So once a month, the Wireless News Desk, which will be a live stream; once a month, a webinar, which will be live and then archived; and then once a month, once a quarter, additional tutorials, deep dives, and more. Now, not listed here and only of relevance to our CWNTs, our Certified Wireless Network Trainers. Once per quarter, we will also be doing a free online class for one of our certifications. So this will be a Train the Trainer event. And again, we've learned it's valuable to us. We get great feedback from our trainers. And what we do in those wouldn't be that good actually for someone trying to get the certification. What we do in those is we go over the slides and I give tips and tricks about how to present it. And then we get feedback and discussion from the group that's there talking about the content and does the slide work? Do we need changes? Things like that. So again, not your typical Train the Trainer even, because it's really more of a tips and tricks for trainers for presenting the content, and then discussion and feedback from the trainers to improve the content as well. So that's something that we're doing too. That's really only for the CWNTs, but it will be freely available to all CWNTs as well. So Gustavo, that's what I had prepared to present. See, there's a perfect example of a slip that we're not going to worry about cutting out of our live events. I said Gustavo.
Hey, Tom. Gustavo has to step away, but I'm here.
Oh, okay. Hi, Yuri. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
So I don't know if we want to have a Q&A period. If you have the ability to do that, I'm happy to. But that's the scheduled content that I had to deliver.
Sure, and we really appreciate, you really went deep dive in some technical aspects. I really appreciate that. I have one question here. So from 0 to CWNP, what's the path? Can you share with us?
From 0 to what? I'm sorry.
CWNE. Sorry.
Oh, so the whole process of going
yeah. So right now, what path do you need to go? I mean, which certification needed? I need to archive things like that.
Yeah.
If you can speak.
So to achieve CWNE, the Certified Wireless Network Expert, you have to have 4 certifications before you can apply.
Okay.
And those are CWNA, CWSP, CWAP, and CWDP.
Okay.
There is no required order for the 3 professional level certifications. You can do them in any order you want. What I generally recommend is to do the certification at the professional level that is most comfortable for you first.
Okay.
That's what I recommend. So in other words, rather than saying, well, I'm going to do the hardest one, I recommend keep the journey going, keep the momentum going. And so, if you know a lot about security, then do CWSP next. If you know a lot about design, maybe you're an Ekahau expert or something, right? Then do that next. So whatever you're most comfortable with, whatever you feel like, I know this stuff and I'm going to be able to really get up to speed and prepare for that exam quick. Do that one, keep the momentum going forward. And there are 2 reasons for that. One, it's about motivation, but 2, it's about filling gaps even in that area that you may not have been aware of and solidifying your knowledge, which will make those more challenging ones easier. What I mean by that is when you get to CWDP, you're going to have to know things about, what frequencies are used, what channels are available, what is the impact of different output power settings and so forth, what configuration changes and settings are best for my BSS and so on. All of that kind of stuff is there in CWDP. And so it begins to give you insights and information about how different frames might be structured in Wi-Fi, which helps a lot when you get to CWAP. Most people feel that CWAP is the most challenging of all, because you have to memorize an awful lot of information about how frames are formatted and structured and what is in certain frames and so forth. But guess what? In CWSP, you learn about the four-way handshake and the frames used in that process. You learn about beacon frames and the RSN element, the RSNE, which is in the beacon frame, which tells you what security is required. And that's part of CWAP. So along that journey, you're learning some of that information, which can help a lot. So I generally recommend CWNA and then whatever professional level you're most comfortable with, and then go on and tackle that most challenging one. And that might be CWA for you, AP for you. It might be CWSP for you. It might be CWDP. I don't know. You might be a protocol analysis guru. And so for you, CWAP is easy. The point is, it's whatever one's most challenging for you. That would be my second professional level certification. That's my general recommendation. Others recommend always do CWAP next and then go through the other two. That's a fine path if that's the one you choose to do. I prefer keeping the motivation up myself. So those 4 are required exams. And then you also have to have CWISA now. So that is the first exam in the wireless IoT track. So there are actually 5 exams now within CWNP.
Okay.
And here's the reason we did that. CWISA introduces you to many different wireless protocols other than Wi-Fi. Gives you an understanding of what's out there and what's involved in a wireless IoT solution. And we feel like if we're going to be a certified wireless network expert, we should probably know Wi-Fi very well, but we should probably also know something about other wireless technologies too. And CWISA gives you that. Then there's a 6th certification that's required, and we don't tell you what that is. We tell you you need an external certification from us. It can come from a vendor. It can be Cisco, Aruba, what have you. It can be another vendor neutral certification, maybe in the security space or something like that you have. But you need that certification. And then the fun part is you get to do your application. And this is where you're going to write 3 essays, 500 to 1,000 words. Please don't go over 1,000 words. Remember that the board, they give their service freely to the community. None of them are paid to be on the board. Now, full disclosure, when we have a conference, which we're really hoping to do next year, when we have a conference, we do allow them to come to the conference free. So they don't have to pay anything to be at the conference. We put them up in a hotel, and we usually take them out to a nice dinner while they're there and things like that. So we do that for them. And that's one of the biggest areas actually that the application fees goes toward covering, is getting them to the conference each year. So we do that, but they're not paid monetarily. We don't give them money for doing it. They do it free. And if you submit 3 2,000-word essays, that means you've asked them to read 6,000 words to review your essays. So please keep it between 500 and 1,000 words, and they'll be much happier with you. And then you have a publication requirement as well, and you need to have 3 years of experience that you can prove working with enterprise Wi-Fi. And then you have 3 endorsements, people who endorse you, that say you have ethics, you work ethically within the industry, and that indeed you are a technical professional. So that's the general set of requirements. And then, it's up to the board. You'll have 5 board members that will review your application and vote. And only if for some reason there's a tie, actually I stated correctly, there are 6 board members who will review your vote. And only if there's a tie would I step in then and have to break that tie as the board chairman of the board. So that's the basic process. And it's similar for CWISE. So if you wanted to do the IoT track, you still have to have the 4 certifications in that track, plus CWNA, and then an external certification, and all the rest is the same. You still need to do your essays and so forth at this point in time. So that, I think that gives you a good overview of the process.
Definitely. Thank you so much. I think that's it. Do you have any other question, Mariana?
No, I just want to say that always a pleasure to listen you, Tom. Like a student and like a teacher, I always learn a lot in these both positions. So it's always a pleasure to listen you, and I learn a lot. And I'm sure our community has a lot to thank you for all your work and all the contents that we have to study this technology. So thank you. Thank you for being here with us today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That's very kind, and I'm very glad to be here. I appreciate you inviting me.
Thank you so much, Tom. And we really appreciate that you spend your time with us.
All right. Take care, everyone.
See you. Bye-bye.
Bye.